Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the world. As many of you know, my name is Zach Jones. Welcome back to my channel, but if you're new to my channel, then welcome. I'm remastering my PowerPoints on extinct animals from the past that I find the most fascinating. And as I've mentioned before, I've been doing this with a lot of my previous PowerPoints. And after this one, I've just got one more to do, and then that's all the PowerPoint presentations I've done remastered. I'm going to start with South America. South America, for over 40 million years, was cut off from the rest of the world until a land bridge, which soon became Central America, formed around 2 million years ago. But I'm going to start with South America's top prehistoric predator for over 40 million years. They are the terror birds, or Forest rachis. Now, these birds were sort of part of a group of flesh-eating birds. It's called the Forest rachids, but of course they're commonly known as terror birds. And these were enormous. I mean, a fully grown adult could have stood 3 meters at 10 feet tall, could run faster than you can drive, and they had an enormous beak that would have been like an enormous cleaver. And of course, terror birds evolved in South America, where they were the top predators for over 40 million years. And of course, they were predators, which meant so they were carnivores, and that meant they ate meat. And terror birds came in a very different range of species. But of course, what they fed on Macrauchenia, Toxodon, possibly Didicurus, as well as all the other strange creatures that inhabited South America, whereas at the same time they did. But about 2 million years ago, when the land bridge to that soon became Central America formed, terror birds soon became unisolated, and of course they were then outcompeted and replaced as top predators by saber-toothed cats, dire wolves. But for a couple million years, they managed to survive alongside those predators like saber-tooths by mostly feeding on their leftovers. But incredibly, once the land bridge opened to North America, terror birds were one of the few creatures of South America that spread north successfully. And while the ones in South America got by eating, saber-toothed cat leftovers, their cousins, in fact, were running riots in Texas and Florida. Of course, terror birds have been featured in many media. In fact, probably the most well-known is here in Walking with Beasts and Prehistoric Park, but probably most famously in Primeval. And in fact, this was actually where I first came across terror birds, in Primeval, Season 3, Episode 6. And of course, that was the first time I saw terror birds, but they were also featured in the Canadian spin-off Primeval New World. And I have studied terror birds for many years now, but fortunately they only died out just before modern humans arrived. So around about just over 1 million years ago was when they all died out, because partly might have been due to climate change and competition for food with mammal predators like the saber-tooths. And here is their range. As I mentioned about South America being isolated from the rest of the world for over 40 million years, it wasn't until the land bridge around here that would soon become Central America formed, And of course, terror birds managed to spread north into Texas and Florida. Now, the next animal I'm going to show you from South America is one of the strangest of them all. It is Dinosaurs. Now, Dinosaurs was an ancient relative of the armadillo, but they were much bigger than a modern armadillo. In fact, they were 4 meters long, weighed as much as a car, and on the end of their tail they had a spiked tail club, and that alone weighed 40 kilos, so about as much as a cannonball. Of course, although they were fearsome defensive weapons, the Dinosaurs more than likely used them in fights with each other during breeding seasons when males would fight each other for the right to a mate. And their armour was quite possibly made of keratin, the same substance that our fingernails are made of. Of course, they died out about 12 million years ago, quite possibly due to heavy climate changes. And they were found in much of South America. Now, the next animal I'm going to show you is another strange creature from South America. It is a sloth, but this isn't any old sloth. This was Megatherium, a giant ground sloth. And the first evidence we had of this animal was this, a bit of hide discovered in a cave in Patagonia around the 1950s. But I'll explain a bit more about that later. Now, ground sloth, like Megatherium, was very different to the modern tree sloths of today. I mean, this was a giant. I mean, it was 6 meters long from nose to tail, weighed more than an elephant, and had enormous claws. So it was a very different relative to different beast to its distant cousins, the gentle tree sloths. Now, as well as its enormous claws, another thing that paleontologists saw was these small nodules underneath the hide, and those were small bones that beneath the skin that acted like chainmail, so adults were virtually indestructible. And they lived in South America up until about 12,000 years ago. They were mostly herbivores, but quite often they would go for carrion dead meat to supplement their diet. And when they did, nothing got in their way. In fact, they were even big and powerful enough to make a Smilodon, a saber-toothed cat, back down. So as soon as a Megatherium would come to a Smilodon pack with a kill, they would immediately back away and leave the kill to the giants. Of course, like many of the giant animals in South America, it might most likely died out about 12,000 years ago due to heavy climate changes. And here is where they were found. I mean, they were found in many parts of South America, but around here is where they're most commonly found. Now, the next animal I'm going to show you is the top predator in the Americas during the prehistoric times. It is Smilodon, or the fabled saber-toothed cats. Now, these were probably the biggest and most powerful big cats of all time. Of course, what you've got to understand is there was no such thing as a saber-toothed tiger. That purely belongs to Diego from the Ice Age movies. Now, the correct name for those creatures is saber-toothed cats, and there have been many different species. In fact, the largest, at over 300 kilograms, was these, Smilodon, which means knife tooth. Now, a fully grown male could have been about the same size and weight as a modern Siberian tiger, so they were immensely heavy and powerful. Of course, they were originally from North America. In fact, 2 million years ago, saber-toothed cats were the apex predators in North America. But once the land bridge opened to South America, they spread down to South America 2 million years ago, and of course they became the top predators in all the Americas. Now, the thing that always catches my attention is, of course, the teeth that give this cat their name. And of course, paleontologists are quite certain how the saber-tooths used their teeth. Of course, looking at the skeleton, you can see it's got enormous stumpy front legs, and that's because this was an animal designed to take down really big mega herbivores weighing twice their weight. And paleontologists are quite certain that rather than going straight in to bite at their prey's throat, they wouldn't use those teeth to throttle their prey like a lion, because if they struck bone, then the teeth would shatter. But if they were trying to bite their prey, which would have been struggling, there might have been a likelihood that their teeth would break. So, what the saber-tooths would do, because paleontologists believed that they hunted in packs like lions, so what they all would have done is they would have all worked together to pin down their struggling prey under the weight of their bodies. And then, when the prey was fully subdued, they would draw their famous saber teeth. So, using those teeth, they would get onto their prey's throats and slice through all the major blood vessels, like the jugular, and crush the windpipe in one devastating bite. So that their prey couldn't attack back, couldn't kick them with hooves, couldn't injure them. But because they couldn't bite into bones, Smilodon were only able to eat probably the fleshier parts of a carcass, which was quite wasteful. So when they'd eaten their fill, the terror birds would feed off their leftovers. Of course, we aren't quite certain that saber-toothed cats like Smilodon did live in packs, because in the fossil records there have been countless skeletons of saber-toothed cats found together of different ages and sizes, all found together at the same place, which is a clue that they associated like lions. And of course the females might have done 90% of the hunting, but the males would have helped out where they could, just like modern lions. And there would have always been one dominant male, and of course the dominant male would have had the most difficult life, because he'd have to spend his life fighting off other males, maintaining order in the pack, and of course passing his genes on to the next generation. And of course, if a fight would break out between the leader and a rival male, they could be brutal, and of course the dominant male would have the most to lose, not only control of the clan, but possibly his own life. In North America, saber-tooths were believed to have hunted things like bison, musk oxen, and horses, and even incredibly, they would have fed on things a lot bigger than horses. In fact, they could have even taken on mammoths. But in South America, they would have hunted things like, native animals of South America, like Macrauchenia, Toxodon, which is this, of course. But of course, unfortunately, saber-tooths, of course, they went extinct about 10,000 years ago, and of course, scientists are quite sure what happened, because around about 12 million years ago in South America, there were big climate changes where the climate became cooler and drier, and that affected the large megafauna like Toxodon and Macrauchenia and Dinosaurs that And of course, saber-tooths were specialised to take out really big prey, and so the massive prey they specialised in